I did the math later when everything had finally settled down and I had a quiet moment to actually think. My brother was 9, I was 26. Our mother had been gone for 43 days. And when I added up every dollar I had scraped together in those 6 weeks, from picking up extra shifts, from selling things, from a few small miracles I will get to, the total came to just under $800. $800 to keep 2 people alive in a 2-bedroom apartment in Mississauga, Ontario, where the rent alone was $1,400 a month. I'm still not sure how we did it. Actually, that's not true. I know exactly how we did it. I just don't always know how to talk about it without my voice doing that thing where it gets very even and very quiet, which my best friend tells me is scarier than if I just cried. So let me start at the beginning, or close to it. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening in late June. I was at work. I was a dental office receptionist at the time, and it was 15 minutes before close, and I was trying to reconcile the day's billing when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let it go again. The third time I stepped into the hallway and answered. She said she needed to go to Edmonton. Her sister, my aunt, had been having some health problems, and my mother wanted to be there. She said it would be 2 weeks, maybe 3. She said she had already arranged things. I asked what things she had arranged. She said she had stocked the fridge. I remember standing in that hallway and looking at the framed picture of a tooth on the wall and thinking, she has stocked the fridge, and she thinks that is arranging things. My brother was living with her. He had been living with her since my parents separated 3 years earlier. I had my own apartment, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building near the lakeshore. But I was at my mother's place most evenings because my brother was 9 and my mother was, even on her best days, scattered. She loved him. I knew that. But love and reliable parenting are not the same thing, and I had understood this for most of my life. I asked if she wanted me to take him while she was gone. She said that would be a big help. I said I would need money for his food and his activities. She said she would transfer some over when she landed. She landed the next morning at 6:42. I know because I checked the flight on my phone, sitting on her couch, my brother asleep in the other room, surrounded by his library books and his half-finished Lego city and his collection of hockey cards sorted by team. My mother had left at 4 a.m. to catch her flight from Pearson. She had kissed me on the cheek. She had said, "Be back in a couple weeks, sweetheart." She had left $40 on the kitchen counter in an envelope with my name on it. $40. I stared at that envelope for a long time. I added up what we needed in my head: groceries, transit for me to get to work, my brother's day camp, which she had not actually registered him for, and which I discovered cost $220 for 2 weeks when I looked it up online the next morning. I thought about calling her. I thought about sending a very specific kind of text message. Instead, I made my brother scrambled eggs and toast and told him we were going to figure out a really great summer. He looked at me with his big serious eyes. He has always had eyes like that, like he is already accounting for the possibility that things will go sideways. And he said, "Okay," and then he asked if we could get slushies later. I said yes, because slushies were $1.49 and I still had $40. I called in every favor I had that first week. I picked up a Saturday shift at the office. I texted a woman I had done some freelance bookkeeping for the previous year and asked if she had anything for me. She did. A small pile of receipts for her home renovation business that needed organizing. She paid me $80 cash. I felt like I had won something. The problem was the camp. My brother had been excited about day camp since April. He had a friend registered, a boy from his class, whose family lived 4 streets over, and the two of them had been talking about it for months. I could not take that away from him. I also could not afford it. The camp ran from 8:30 to 4:30 on weekdays, which meant he could not come to work with me, which meant I needed something. I called the recreation center and explained my situation, very briefly and without self-pity, and asked if they had any subsidy programs. They did, a sliding scale program for low-income families that I had not known existed. I had to fill out a form and provide my mother's income information, which I did not have. I called my mother to ask for it. She didn't answer. I sent a text, no response. I called again the next morning and the morning after that. By the fourth day, I stopped counting. In the end, the woman at the recreation center, her name was something I have since forgotten, but her kindness I have not, walked me through what documentation we actually needed and found a way to process it with what I could provide. My brother started camp on the Monday of the second week. He came home that first day with paint on his elbow and told me they had made volcanoes and that his friend had gotten red paint on the counselor's shoes, and it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. He was 9. It was the funniest thing that had ever happened. I cried a little in the kitchen while I made dinner. Not sad crying. Just the kind of crying that happens when you have been holding something tight for a long time and something suddenly goes right. The money though. The money was still the problem. I was making $22 an hour at the dental office, which sounds reasonable until you subtract taxes and transit and the fact that my landlord had raised my rent 3 months earlier and I was already stretched. I had been managing, just barely, before all of this. Now I had a 9-year-old to feed and a $40 buffer that had already been spent on groceries and one transit card reload. There's a thing that happens when you are a person who is used to managing, who has always been the one who makes a plan and works the plan. When you run into a wall, some people shut down. I have never been able to shut down. I just start moving faster. Like if I keep moving, I will find the door that should be there somewhere. I started looking for ways to cut costs that I hadn't considered before. I downloaded one of those apps that aggregates grocery flyers and started planning meals around whatever was on sale. I stopped buying coffee on the way to work and started bringing it in a travel mug. Small things. They added up to maybe $40 a week in savings, which helped but not enough. Then I found the bread. This sounds less dramatic than it was. The bakery 2 blocks from the dental office, a Portuguese place that made extraordinary custard tarts, and a seeded loaf that I had been buying on Fridays as a treat, put a sign in the window that said day-old bread, 1 dulcons. I went in and asked about it. The owner, a man who had been running the place for 30 years and who I knew slightly from being a regular customer, explained that they had always sold day-old bread at a discount but had never advertised it because they assumed people would come in and ask. He said a lot went to waste. I bought 4 loaves. I made sandwiches for a week. And then, standing in that bakery, something clicked. I had been doing the dental office admin for 4 years. I knew every business on that street. I knew the deli owner who always had too much sliced meat at the end of the day. I knew the Greek restaurant that stayed open until midnight and threw away an enormous amount of prepared food every Monday because they overmade for the weekend. I knew the grocery store manager who had complained to me once, while I was having a cavity filled in the chair next to his, that food waste was destroying his margins. I went home and I made a list. I want to be clear. I was not trying to start something. I was trying to get through the next month. I was trying to keep the lights on and my brother fed and not fall so far behind on my own rent that I couldn't catch up when my mother came back. That was all I was trying to do. But the list became something. I spent one evening going back through the street, not as a customer, but as a person asking very specific questions. Did they have surplus at end of day? What kind? How much was anyone picking it up? Most of them said no. Most of them said the surplus just went into the bin. One of them, the deli owner, who was a practical man with very little patience for wasted resources, looked at me for a long moment and said, "If you can pick it up, you can have it." I said I didn't know what I'd do with 50 portions of sliced turkey. He said that was my problem to solve, not his. Fair enough. I thought about the community center 2 streets over. I had gone there once for a free workshop on tenant rights, ironically, and I had seen the bulletin board covered in notices for food banks and hot meal programs and resources for people who were, as the posters put it, experiencing food insecurity. I had walked past those posters without really stopping. I stopped now in my memory and actually looked at them. I emailed the community center that night. I explained that I had access to surplus prepared food and baked goods from local businesses and that I wanted to connect it to people who could use it. I expected to hear back in a few days. They called me the next morning at 8:15. A woman named, and I am using her real name because she deserves it. A woman whose name I will not use without permission, but who I will tell you, had a voice like she had been waiting for exactly this call, said, "When can you start?" The logistics were simpler than I expected, which meant they were still complicated. I had no car. My brother was in camp until 4:30. I worked until 5. The pickups needed to happen in the evening, which meant I was doing a circuit on foot and on my bike after dinner. With a collection of insulated bags I had borrowed from a neighbor and a folding cart I found at the thrift store for $7. My brother came with me sometimes. He was very serious about it. He carried the lighter bags. He kept a mental count of how many loaves we had picked up and announced the total at each stop like he was a logistics coordinator. At the third stop, the Greek restaurant, the owner started saving us a box without being asked. He put a little container of spanakopita in it with a sticky note that said "for the little guy." My brother ate it cold on the walk home and declared it the best thing he had ever put in his mouth. I don't know exactly when word got around, but it did. By the third week, 2 other people had offered to help. A retired woman from the community center who had a car and could do daytime pickups, and a university student who wanted volunteer hours. I was coordinating, not just collecting. I had a spreadsheet, I had pickup schedules, I had a group chat. I had not solved my rent problem. I want to be honest about that. The food circuit was not paying me. What it was doing was feeding my brother and me. We always took what we needed from the surplus, and it was giving me something I had not expected, a reason to keep my head up. The rent problem I solved in a less inspiring way. I talked to my landlord. I had been a tenant for 3 years with a perfect payment history, and I explained briefly that I was in a temporary situation and asked if I could defer $200 from that month's rent and add it to the following month. He said yes. I have thought about that conversation many times since. It cost me approximately 4 minutes of discomfort, and it bought me breathing room I desperately needed. The utilities were in my mother's name at her apartment, where my brother was technically still supposed to be living. I had been forwarding her mail to my place. I opened an electricity bill and a phone bill on a Thursday night and sat with them for a long time. Then I called the utility company, explained I was the primary caregiver for a minor at the address, and asked about the process for temporary account management. They had a process. It was bureaucratic and slow, and eventually it worked. My mother called on day 31, not because she had been worried, because her sister's situation had resolved faster than expected, and she was thinking of coming home. I was standing in my kitchen. My brother was at the table eating cereal and reading one of his hockey books. I walked into the hallway and closed the door very quietly and said, "When?" She said, "Maybe next week, if the flights worked out." I said, "Okay." She asked how everything was going. I said, "Fine." She asked if my brother was behaving. I said he was wonderful. There was a pause, and then she said, "You sound tired." I said I was fine. She said, "I'll be home soon, sweetheart." I stood in the hallway after she hung up, leaning against the wall with my phone pressed to my chest, and I did that quiet breathing that my best friend finds frightening, and I gave myself 60 seconds to feel everything I was feeling. 60 seconds, exactly. Then I went back into the kitchen and asked my brother if he wanted more cereal. He did. My mother came home on a Thursday 43 days after she left. She took a cab from the airport, which I know because she texted me her ETA from the cab. I had taken my brother back to her apartment the day before and made sure it was clean, and that there was food in the fridge. Real food, not just condiments and a half-empty box of crackers, and that his homework folder from the last day of camp was on the counter where she would see it. I was not there when she arrived. I was at work. She called me at 2 in the afternoon. I was between patients, she said. I went through his backpack. I said, "I know." She said, "There's a whole folder of things from the camp. Art projects, a certificate of completion." I said, "Yes," she said. "And there's a thank you card in here from the community center with his name on it as a junior volunteer." I said he had been coming with me on the pickup routes. I said he had been very good at it. There was a long silence on the phone, the kind of silence that has weight. She said, "I left you $40. I said, "I know." She said, "How did you?" And then she stopped. I said, "We figured it out." Another silence. And then my mother, who is not a crier, who I have seen cry maybe 3 times in my entire life, made a sound that I will not try to describe except to say that I knew exactly what it meant. It meant she was looking at her son's artwork and his camp certificate and a thank you card from a community center, and she was doing the math the same way I had done it, and she was understanding what those 40 days had actually cost and what they had also unexpectedly built. She said, "I'm sorry," and she said it like she meant it, not like someone who wants to move past an uncomfortable moment, but like someone who has actually stopped and looked at something and understood it. I said, "I know, I didn't say it was okay. I want to be honest about that too. I didn't say it because it wasn't entirely true yet, and I have made a practice of not saying things that aren't true." I said I know, and I meant that I believed her. The community center program is still running. I'm not running it anymore. I handed it off to the retired woman with the car, who turned out to have an extraordinary gift for coordination and who has since expanded the pickup routes to cover 3 more businesses. I stayed involved as a backup and a consultant, which is a generous title for someone who answers texts about scheduling conflicts. But I'll take it. My brother turned 10 in September. For his birthday, he asked if we could do one of the pickup routes together, just him and me, like we used to. So we did. He carried the bags, he kept the count. At the Greek restaurant, the owner had left a box with a sticky note that just said 10. And inside was a full container of spanakopita and a small baklava. My brother ate the baklava on the walk home and said it was possibly even better than the spanakopita, but that he didn't want to commit to a ranking without more data. He is going to be fine. More than fine. My mother and I are in a different place now. It took time. We did a few sessions with a family counselor, a thing I suggested, and that she agreed to more easily than I expected, which told me something. We have talked about that summer with more honesty than we ever used to talk about anything. She has told me things about her own childhood that I did not know, and I have understood some things that I did not understand before. I have not let her off the hook. I have also not let the hook define our entire relationship. Someone told me once that forgiveness isn't trust. Forgiveness is just deciding to stop carrying something that was never yours to carry in the first place. I used to think that was a nice thing people said. Now I think it's actually accurate. I put down some of what I had been carrying. I did not hand it back to her and call it fine. There is a difference. There is always a difference. And I think knowing that difference is how I got through those 43 days and how I keep going now, on the ordinary days when nothing is dramatic and the math mostly works out. And my brother texts me memes about hockey players and the bread at the bakery is fresh and costs the normal price and I buy it anyway, just because I can.